Welcome to the ISO Show, dispelling myths and sharing tips for success to improve your business with ISO standards, with your host, Mel Blackmore.
Hi and welcome to the ISO Show. Well, you've probably heard a rumour that there is going to be a new version of ISO 27001 coming out later this year. We will have a podcast on that, of course, or probably numerous podcasts, where we'll be talking about the changes to ISO 27001. But in the meantime, there is a lot of talk about the latest guidance. So this is ISO 27002, which is the updated Code of Practice for Information Security Controls. And there are a number of changes in relation to the controls. And this podcast is just going to highlight some of the changes. So, what's new, what does this mean? So you've got a bit of an idea of what's going on in relation to 27002. So I'm just going to provide a very brief overview. But then we'll have a couple of other episodes where Steve Mason, our information security guru, is going to be explaining in a lot more detail. And we're also going to be covering some specific episodes on certain new controls that people might be scratching their head at, thinking, well, what does this actually mean? And how can it be applied? And how can I demonstrate evidence of compliance to this when it comes to certification? But that's quite a long way off yet in terms of, certification to the new 27001. But bear in mind that the controls from 27002 could actually be integrated right now. Okay, so this standard is available to purchase. So 27002 was recently updated and several changes have been made to it to bring the standard up to date. Because as we know, technology changes at a rapid pace, and especially I think since COVID, where we have been switching more to digital solutions for absolutely everything. I think there are more people now that are shopping online, that are having meetings online. So we are, in a digital age right now. So the standards need to keep up with that. I think the other thing as well is that there has been recognition that we need to simplify the use of the controls. I mean, as consultants at Blackmores, we would ordinarily reduce the complexity of the controls into, let's say, an access control policy. So you're condensing, 6 or 7 controls into one policy statement. So it's great to see that there has been some simplification of the controls. But what does this actually mean to your information security management system? And how might it impact what you're currently doing? Well, there isn't any need to make any immediate changes, as ISO 27002 is not a certifiable standard. So I'll repeat that, 27002 is not a certifiable standard, and it doesn't impact your certification to 27001 in any way currently. However, we should see the new standard as an opportunity to prepare for the expected changes to ISO 27001, which is the certifiable standard. So that, and as I mentioned earlier, that's expected to come out later this year. And it's expected that the inclusion of the new controls from 27002 will be there for the existing statement of applicability. So there isn't any harm in getting a heads up on this right now, over the next month or two, because it will put you in a much stronger position moving forward. And of course, it demonstrates continual improvement because you are applying this code of best practice. Okay, so remember, it's not 27002 is not certifiable, but it is best practice. So it's worthwhile looking into it. So why has this particular standard changed? Well, it's typical that all standards undergo this regular review, and they're generally done at planned intervals, generally every 7 to 8 years, and that is to make sure that the content remains appropriate. And then we reissue that. Okay, so the last change to 27002 was back in 2013, so that's almost a decade ago. And we know that there have been so many changes since then. I think back then we probably had a physical server in our office, and we that's where we had our CRM. We were using Act, whereas now, we're using Teams channels for our management system. We have Microsoft 365. So much has changed. Okay, so when you actually look at some of the controls from that standard, they're actually, in many cases, uncomfortably out of date right now. And obviously, that's not the way that should be. So just very briefly, I'm not going to go into the nuts and bolts of 27002. I'm going to be leaving that to Steve Mason. But just at a very high level, the changes are basically that in terms of the reductions of controls, we're now moving from 114 controls in Annex A, okay, which ordinarily that would be represented in your statement of applicability. So we're actually going from 114 controls down to 93. Okay, so it's going from 114 down to 93. So some of those controls have been removed, some of them have been condensed. Okay, so yeah, we've got a reduction there, which I think is, when you look at them and how they've been worded, is a good thing. And also these have been aligned to 4 themed sections instead of 14 control groups. Okay, so instead of 14 control groups, you've now got 4 themed sections. And these 4 areas are organisational, number 1, people, number 2, physical, number 3, and technological, number 4, which I think is great because it's getting down to, well, I think it's great for a couple of reasons. One, obviously, is a simplification, but I think secondly, it blows some of those myths out of the water that this is an IT security standard. Okay, so there's a lot of common myths about that the 27001 standard is all about IT security. Well, whenever I speak to a prospective client, I'm always explaining that it's not just about IT, it's not just about the technological part, it is about physical security, securing your buildings, your premises inside your buildings. It's about the people, because quite often they can be the biggest risk, unfortunately, and it's been proven report after report that's published each year by the government on that it's quite often accidental, and it's down to people, because obviously people manage processes and technology. And obviously organisational, so you need people to make this happen. You need structure, organisation and a systemised approach, which of course 27001 helps us to do. So each control has been aligned with these attributes and themes, which are intended to help organisations to align their management system with other security frameworks, such as NIST or SOC. And these attributes could include things like control types, information security properties, and then other things that you're probably already doing at the moment, like cybersecurity concepts. So this could align quite nicely with Cyber Essentials or Cyber Essentials Plus. And then the other 2 areas, as an example, would be operational capabilities and security domains. Now, as I said, I'm not going to go into too much detail, but I just wanted to mention that there are 11 new controls that have been added. But I'm going to leave that up to Steve Mason to talk about in the next podcast, which will be coming up. Okay, but those 11 new controls are in 3 areas. Organisational controls, so we've got 3 new controls in there. We've got 1 new control in physical controls. We've got 7 new controls under the technological controls. Okay, so the areas where we've got new controls are organisational, physical and technological controls. But yeah, I'll leave that up to Steve Mason to explain about that in a lot more detail. So information on this will be available in our show notes. So please head over to that. So for those of you that are listening to this on the move, don't forget to go onto blackmoresuk.com. And also we are starting to put coffee break training into our membership portal on each of the new controls. So that's something that Steve's been developing, and that's being transferred over. And that's over in the ISology Hub. So that's isologyhub.com, which is our go-to place for all references on CPD and how-tos. Thanks very much for listening. And hopefully you'll enjoy the next podcast with Steve Mason. I'm actually going to be on holiday then, so Steph Churchman, our amazing comms manager that produces these podcasts, will be doing the intro on my behalf. So I'm sure that's a podcast that you'll find really useful and interesting if you have any interest in information security and the changes that are coming up. Thanks for listening.
Looking to use ISO standards to drive better business practice? Contact us at blackmoresuk.com to access further information and book your free 15-minute call.